Looking to keep up with recruiting trends and headlines? You're in the right place. Welcome to Career Crossroads, the premier talent acquisition community. Online at www.cxr.works with your host, Chris Hoyt and Gerry Crispin.
Pleasant good afternoon, everyone. This is Gerry Crispin from Career Crossroads. I'm surrounded by a whole group of interesting characters from Mary Grace from GraceRock and Martin Burns from Hireclix, as well as several practitioners who we'll introduce in just a minute. Our goal in the next 30 to 45 to 60 minutes at the most is to begin a discussion about source of hire, one that started a couple weeks ago at Unleash and was actually inspired by a post that Mary Grace did about a month or so ago, talking about source of hire and some of the problems and challenges, and as well as advantages. If we could finally figure out how to do it relatively well, we might actually infer some great things about how we could improve our decision making from a practitioner point of view. So with that said, let me turn it over to Mary Grace to get us started, and let's talk a little bit about source of hire.
Thanks, Gerry. Greetings, everyone. I'm happy to be joining this team of talent acquisition professionals to talk about, what we've historically called a source of hire. I've had the pleasure of working with all of you at some point along the way in my career, and I'm going to turn it over to you guys to do introductions. So Jen, if you could kick us off with practitioner introductions, and then we'll get into things from there.
Sure. Thanks, Mary Grace. Hi, I'm Jennifer Tracy. I am a VP of Recruiting Solutions for Spectrum. And basically what that oversees is it's a COE function within our organization that oversees assessments, employment branding, recruiting operations, as well as our specialty recruiting and diversity, military, and university.
Great. Happy to have you on today. Allyn, how about over to you?
Great. Hi. So my name is Allyn Bailey. I am part of Intel's Global Talent Acquisition team. My focus is managing our transformation as we start to transform from focusing on transactions to relationships. And so I've been driving that work for the last 3 or 4 years and continuing forward as we go into their next evolution.
And Adam, I've lost your video, but are you still on with us?
I'm here, yeah. I can see everyone and see my own video, so hopefully
there you are.
Other people can see my beautiful face. I'm Adam Eisenstein, the Global Recruiting Brand Manager for BCG, Boston Consulting Group. I joined there about 5 years ago and oversee all the recruiting brand functions across BCG, 50 offices, 90 plus countries. Previously was at McGraw-Hill, then became McGraw-Hill Financial. Before that, I was just another theater and film guy in New York trying to struggle and get a living. So I found my way into a new and better place. Great.
Happy to have you all with us today. I'm going to start us off with just a little bit of a conversation. So Martin Burns and Gerry and I last week were at the Unleash conference. And one of the keynotes there was by someone named Peter Henson, and he's the founder of NextWorks. And their goal is inspiring organizations to act on their day after tomorrow. He talked about how the world is moving past digital and onto cognitive. And he also talked about, how folks spend their time today. A lot focused on today, a little bit on what's happening tomorrow, and not so much thinking about that day after tomorrow. And, he encourages folks to flip that mindset. And so one time he was giving this talk to a leader, and the person came up and drew on his chart and said, "You forgot something that's actually a big part of my day. I'll call it the SOY." And he's like, what is that? And he said, "The shit of yesterday." So the reason I bring this up is because, we have been here for a long time talking about, source of hire. And I think if there's anything that's mired in the SOY when it comes to recruiting, it's the SOH, or source of hire, as it's long been called. And why we're here today is really to learn from you guys as practitioners how we can think about moving the dialogue forward on this topic. and what both practitioners can be thinking about and what the providers can be thinking about as well. So again, thanks for taking the time. We're going to start with each of you guys sharing a glimpse of your world and your process of how you're getting to that day after tomorrow when it comes to your recruiting strategy specifically. And, you know, with that, I'm going to turn things over to Adam and let you talk a little bit.
Great. Yes. I will spend a decent amount of time on that SOI and hopefully make everybody feel a little better about some of their own struggles with source tracking. When I started my recruiting brand journey at McGraw-Hill, they had 3 separate major business areas, but they were starting to kind of coalesce the global recruiting function that went across all of them. And so because of that, I was able to help advance this sort of metrics and tracking capabilities, and take the recruitment advertising in-house away from using the metrics and source data to help us make some of those advertising decisions. When I came to BCG 5 years ago, you know, I found a very different kind of landscape and a very different kind of business as consulting, management consulting is. It's a highly decentralized world with recruiting functions across consulting teams, but really is driven at a local level. And then with the addition of new business brands, either by acquisition or by developing them internally, the landscape became quite complicated with 4 different application tracking systems in play across the system. Long-standing relationships on the core consulting side, you know, BCG's brand for consulting and hiring at the campus level was super strong. You know, years, decades of time spent with these specific sources. But as the growth of BCG moved them into needing more experienced hires, needing to hire people directly into different practice areas, which was something new, expanding to digital capabilities of hiring a lot of data scientists for BCG Gamma or IT architects for BCG Platinian, or kind of startup-minded people for BCG Digital Ventures. The picture became very, very complex. So to get source tracking pan BCG became really near impossible, and at this point it still is. But the sort of lesson that I can bring to the table here is, as these groups started to come together and push for a more inclusive branding and an external presence that can support recruiting across all of these different business areas, I've taken it as an opportunity to start to educate some of these different areas on the importance of source tracking. If we're going to start to have a real unified global recruiting brand, we need some unified global recruiting processes, and to start the process of bringing people together into a unified application tracking system and a unified agreement on what metrics are important and how we can use them, so that we can then make data-driven decisions about recruiting, also make data-driven decisions for our marketing spend, for our branding, and improve the candidate experience. So where we are today with BCG is obviously we have our top sources, campus recruiting, still really strong, a lot more agency use than people would like to have. And it's at a moment where there's a real, I think, tipping point here that's happening, where we have all these people now, we have their attention because of the lack of source metrics and other metrics, and now much better understanding that everybody is going to need to work together to make some compromises on platforms for the greater good of all.
Thanks for sharing, Adam. I know you're not alone in having multiple systems and therefore serious data challenges. So thanks for sharing and being, you know, open and honest about the pain that caused therein. So good stuff.
Pain is real. The struggle is real, as we say.
All right, Jen, I'm going to pass it over to you.
All right, thank you. So in 2016, we had the pleasure of merging 3 companies together. And really what that meant is we got to rebuild everything that supports HR. And this provided that perfect convergence of beginning with the end in mind. And, unlike, it sounds like what Adam had in his organization, we actually went back to having one system for everything that we did. And so that was helpful. And, any metrics journey that you're on should always have strong partnerships between, your ATS and your agency and your vendors, and my internal resources like HR technology and our brand teams. And it's also never done. And so what you're looking at on the screen here, really represents my function serves as a COE to our recruiting leaders in our business unit. And so this is showing our enterprise level metrics, but it's also something that I provide as a report out to our business unit leaders so they can see their metrics on a monthly basis. And we do that in partnership with TMP. And what that allows us to do is to provide the shared accountability. My team is responsible for that overall spend, but at the same time, it allows that recruiting leader, if something's not right or they're still not seeing enough hires, we have a conversation, a meaningful conversation about what we might need to do to optimize. The 2 key metrics that I'll talk about actually for the next couple of slides are really centered around cost per application and cost per hire, and that's really how I drive a lot of our decision making. So if we can move to the next slide. This slide really shows you the cost per application at the enterprise level again, year to date. And what that allows me to see is where are things performing, what works well, what doesn't work well. If you look at Facebook, that tends to be more of an awareness driver for us than actual conversion, and that's okay. But having a really good understanding of where you sit with all these different resources is really helpful. And if we could go to the next slide, it'll show you that same lens, but really at the cost per hire level. And, not surprising, something like a Dice is a niche site for us is pretty high compared to something like an Indeed, which is much more reasonable, and Google, which is the most reasonable. So if we keep looking forward, on the next slide, you'll see actually to iSoar, but this is what's really helpful for me as being that consultant to the business. I actually can then show each business unit, which is what you're seeing across the top of the screen, and versus the source down the side to show the different levels of source optimization. And, we really look at our business in 2 different buckets of hiring. We have our high volume on the customer ops side and field ops and our sales and marketing roles. And then we have our lower volume positions, which is cable operations, which is our product team, our network operations, which is what powers our customers' network, and so on and so forth. And so we break those out, and obviously, depending on the volume and also the level of interest from the business, we modify their marketing plans accordingly. And so certainly last but not least, this is the last slide shows you the cost per hire. And this is really kind of where we drive. We try and drive to that $10 cost per application and $244 cost per hire. This was really the start of our journey. We first kind of got up our new career site. Then we did these first reports in 2017. More recently, we actually launched an amplified version of Metrics Gateway, which is a product that we've helped build out. And the way that I approach source of hire, I look at it as an education tool to ensure that the recruiters that are in our organization are making meaningful decisions and understanding what and where is happening for them so that they can become experts in recruiting. And so the Metrics Gateway platform goes to the rec level as well as to the recruiter level so they can see what is happening in their area. And more recently, or coming later this summer, we have a version 2 that's going to incorporate our brass ring data because I look at the optimal view of getting to source of hire, incorporating not only these digitally tracked pieces, but also making sure that we take a look at the softer pieces. So you saw Adam talk a lot about campus recruiting or employer referrals. I think all of those things layered together is really the true source. And so that's where we'll go next.
Pretty awesome what you've got. So kudos.
Thank you.
Yeah. And, if you had any advice to somebody on a journey of trying to get to where they have metrics like this,
yes.
If you were to give advice to Adam today, what would it be for how to move in this direction?
I would say you have to start with getting, and he mentioned earlier, getting the processes aligned to at least certain touch points. all of our business units will tell you they have different processes to a certain degree, but there are certain touch points we've agreed to that we're going to track so that we can report out as an entity, as talent acquisition professionals. That's where I would start. And then trying to the best of your ability to align systems, if you can. Sometimes that's possible, sometimes it's not. We have, on our customer side, we have billing systems that aren't aligned. So I understand that. But those are the two places I would start.
Great. All right, Allyn, we are going to move on over to you.
Okay, great. So source of hire, and I actually will tell you we're actually starting to move towards thinking about this as more of source of influence, is important data for us. But one of the things I want to preface this by is saying we've really been exploring what the value of that data source is for us and using that to help define how we want to align looking at that data, right? I actually have a PR I work with here who frequently says the data itself, the indicator itself, is trivia, right? What really makes it valuable is the context by which it is applied and what questions it is able to answer for us and how we help the organization leverage it. So when we look at source of hire or source of influence data, what we're very specifically looking at is what types of questions are we trying to answer. And as I say this, I'm going to tell you this is our intention. We are not by any means golden at figuring out how this data is accurate or does it actually get us to the accurate answer of what we're looking for in each of these places. But we know this is what we're trying to accomplish. So I mentioned that we're moving from this space of looking at relationships versus transactions, or kind of looking at individual hires. And so one of the things we need to understand from our source of hire data or source of influence data is how well does an individual source actually generate pipeline contacts for us. So we want to be able to understand both how does it help us get people into our pipeline so we can manage and engage with them, as well as how well does it do at converting specifically to applicants and then obviously to the hire space. So one of the things we're trying to understand for each of our source points is where in the journey do they fall and how do they help facilitate each of those different steps. The second big question that we're trying to address and answer is how well does it relate, does it perform relative to other sources, right? So looking at it at two places, one, both the applicant conversion space and the hire conversion space. And as we started to explore this data, one of the things that we're finding is that there's, you mentioned this a little bit, Jen, when you're talking about your indicators, right? Some of our sources are much more valuable during the journey a candidate is taking. It's much more of a capture mechanism or even a influence mechanism, not necessarily something that you would just attribute directly to source of hire, which is one of the reasons why as we look at this data, we're finding if we look at the data just from an ATS perspective, what we get is last touch point, right? Last touch point tells us very little. It tells us the very last thing that somebody did. It tells me nothing about how they got there or the journey that they kind of went through as they did that. So as we've been taking our CRM and combining our CRM data with our ATS data, we started to get the next layer, which started to show us a little bit about the entry and exit of people into our pipeline and what was happening there from a source perspective. But we realized we actually needed one more layer on top of that, which was looking at all of the individual sources and how could we get that data to draw a fuller picture for us around the overall candidate journey. What was the pathing people were taking as they go from one source to the next source? And how could we use that information to both personalize the journey we're driving candidates through, but also be more purposeful in the types of content and messaging we're placing in those particular places. So that's been a big process for us as we've gone through that. I will tell you, literally the biggest challenge is having all of that data speak to each other. Right? So how do we take all these multiple sources of data, sources of data talking about sources, right? How do we take all of those individual pieces and have them have a common language amongst each other and also have a centralized way at which I can take that data and visualize it and leverage it so that I can help tell the stories across the organization. And that fundamentally has been our biggest challenge and opportunity as we started to move forward. We also, as we've gone through this journey, are seeing the biggest change in who leverages and uses this data. So when we were looking at it just as source of hire data, then it was very specifically used as part of the operational indicators for the operations team to say how much impact are we having against a particular requisition or a particular job code. Now, as we start to look at it as source of influence data, the consumers of this information is much more our recruitment marketing teams and our sourcing teams, trying to understand how they can personalize and influence how they capture and manage the candidate engagement throughout the journey, which changes what I need from the vendors I work with in terms of the reporting, the types of information that I need in order to answer those questions.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating how you've got, like this, 5.58 touches per contact, and the concept of, and I don't know how well people can see what's over on the right rail because our pictures are there. But it's, top first sources, top last sources. So knowing what's the first source what's bringing people in and what are the last things that people are interacting with as well.
Right.
Really cool stuff.
And one of the things that becomes really critical as you look at that data, Mary Grace, for us is trying to understand not just at a global level what's happening first and last, and it becomes much more important now to understand by audience. So needing to be able to segment it by audience, not just campaign, has been a challenge as well.
Yeah. So great stuff. So there is a survey that we've used as part of this process, and we asked a number of people where they are in their journey on this topic. And I want to ask you guys some of those same questions so they can, if you've taken the survey or if you take the survey in the future, which if you go to GraceRock.com/source of hire, you'll find the survey there. But the survey questions I'm going to go through, and we're also going to share the results of the first people that have taken the survey. We've got, a couple dozen who have taken it, and we are going to leave it open and continue to gather data on this. But just want to add some color of, from this context of the experience that you guys each have and the capabilities and where you are in the maturity of understanding and leveraging this information to help drive strategy at your company is kind of where you guys fall on these topics. So we're going to move into that. All right. So we've seen the metrics that you have or don't have. How confident are you that the overall data that you're using and that you receive in source tracking is actually reliable data? And Allyn, I'll start off with you on this one, if you don't mind.
Yeah. So I can wax on this one for a very long time, but I can tell you that we're not confident at all. And in fact, one of the biggest challenges we have is when we get data from multiple sources and it is different, right? In any way, right? The way in which one vendor or one source may talk about clicks versus another source, the way my CRM captures the click versus Indeed captures the click versus the ATS captures the click means I've got three different numbers that I'm looking at for source of hire or source of influence. And although I think at a larger level we can abstract general trends from that information, what becomes challenging is when I have to go back and work with the particular team or business group and talk about what this data is telling them. They immediately get wrapped around the axle around why one says 15 clicks and one says 300 clicks. And I'm trying to explain that it's a different definition of clicks and it's all fine and it really means the same thing. Nobody believes that, right? And all that does is complicate the ability for us to be able to manage the business. So I honestly don't know when I look at my data how reliable it is. I don't trust it in terms of specific numbers. I look at it only in terms of being able to give me trends and to be able to give me some sort of sense of what's going on. But that puts me as somebody who's trying to drive business change or business decision across the organization in a very challenging position because I am then forced to say, I don't believe it either, but it's okay. Right? Nobody's going to buy that picture with me.
Right.
So.
This is Career Crossroads, the premier talent acquisition community. Online at www.cxr.works with your host, Chris Hoyt and Gerry Crispin.
when you started your first talk about what you have, and it was just a beautiful set of inferences that you were drawing. You did note that you're not concerned at this moment with the accuracy of all of that. You're trying to do the best you can with what you've got. But the truth of the matter is, if the foundation of data is not cleaned up in a quality way, then our decisions are going to be come under question as well. And so fundamentally, one of the issues that we're going to have to deal with is how data is collected and cleaned so that we have a consistent confidence that we can make choices about that. And it's very fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'd agree. And what's frustrating too is that in consumer marketing, they've nailed this already. They've got a better sense for their data, its integrity, and they have standards. We're still kind of fishing in the dark here a little bit, which is.
And I mean, you will talk to people on the consumer side, and they will echo some of these challenges for sure. But yeah, they have made more progress.
Along. Yeah, they're much farther along towards at least having some confidence.
I think there's also the issue of the different ways that data is collected. You're by and large using the technology that you have available to you to pull that information in, but you also want to pull in information about the degree to which some part of that has a relationship with someone within your organization. So the degree that referrals are involved, the degree that other information is necessary for you to fully understand what those touch points were, whether they truly were the first point or the last point, and what went on in between that might have influenced their decision to move forward. And so integrating all of those pieces into a single dashboard is still out there for most of us.
Sure.
And I think it's going to be really interesting to see if we can build a common platform, if you will, for all of that to be put together.
Well, Gerry, one of the things that's so important as we think about this, I think that original slide you talked about is as we start to think about moving into the cognitive era, right? As we start to have new overarching analytics tools to start to take all this data and leverage it to make inference decisions based on it, right? Looking at AI technologies and other capabilities that come into play. We're already seeing them being explored, for example, and being able to look at messaging impact and personalization capabilities, all of these things. They're going to be reliant on each of the different inputs that it gets to be somewhat standardized or to be connected together so that it can make good inference, right? A machine, when it's starting to make inference and correlation, is not going to apply the same amount of just kind of personalized judgment that we as human beings inherently do, right? So to make it work and to work well for us, figuring out this shit of yesterday, right, the source of hire, is critical in order for us to be able to make all these new capabilities work for us. If everybody's not speaking the same language, if all the data is not connected together and easily able to find how it works together and connects, then the machines aren't going to be able to help us make good decisions off of it.
I would agree. And in addition, there's a human issue that's missing as well. We have too quickly dismissed the voice of the customer itself. So we're making inferences about how candidates are touching us on their journey to us. And yet we've decided never to talk to them again about what they perceive is that journey because we think it's unreliable. They don't know where they've been. Well, you know what? We may have just asked them all the wrong questions in all the wrong ways. When they were asked a question of what was it that caused them to apply to your company, we gave them 400 different choices, all jumbled up in a variety of different ways. And it's no wonder that they chose the first one at the top of the list of the drop-down menu. We need a better way to ask better questions of the customer themselves so that we can better understand how to obviously infer some of the things that we're learning about that journey. And we've eliminated that. none of you talked about a self-report in any way, shape, or form, or really getting guidance from the customer itself. And yet none of you would solve problems without getting voice of the customer. So,
yeah, you're absolutely right, and we talk, and when we do go talk to the customer today, it is frequently using our own language, which makes it very difficult for them to be able to connect it to us.
We could learn to do better, and that's where those standards need to be enforced too.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I'm gonna keep us moving. Great discussion. This is the data we've gotten so far. So everywhere from a few really bad, a few more not okays than anything else, a couple that are kind of in the it's okay category, and then we don't have anyone that's like our data is rock solid. So nobody feels that way, at least so far, from the people we've talked to. And again, surveys open. Others are certainly welcome to chime in here. Love to hear your own experiences.
Yeah, what I get is it basically is telling us what we've assumed is that practitioners out there do not believe the data that they're getting. Yet obviously many of you are using that data to do the best you can with what you've got.
And just to echo Allyn's point for the last slide about machine learning, the worse the data is, it's just we're going to put this on steroids. The problem actually get much worse.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
If we apply a machine to it. It's just going to accelerate.
Yeah. I mean, there's always a demand for the newer, shinier things out there. People want to push for AI use, for personalization, and I would love to do all those things, but we have to get the foundation right, and otherwise we're just going to be pointing fingers at each other when it comes to KPIs and what's real. Yeah,
for sure. I mean, that's why we're always we're cautious with programmatic, because it can be great in certain situations, but if your data isn't good, you're just jump balling stuff over and over again. You're flooding with applicants who aren't good quality. So
I'll make a point that any of the folks who are in the audience, you're welcome to write something on the chat. We can unmute you, we can engage you, but obviously it's not to keep you out. It's just to keep noise in some organized fashion. So chime in. Why don't we move on there?
All right. The next question up, what tools are you using to help drive your recruitment advertising strategy? So what is the technology that's really, underlying how you're driving that strategy? And Jen, I'm gonna start us off with you.
So I'm going to talk about two new ones that we are starting to work with, and one's not launched yet. One's in the final production stages. One is called Altru, which is basically, we've been trying to drive to employee-generated content for the last two and a half years. This will be our first foray into that space. And so Altru allows an employee to record a 30 to 45-second video, and it's going to be a key new cornerstone for our career site. So it interacts with the content on the career site based on the search functionality of the user. So that, Gerry, going back to your comments about kind of meeting the candidate where they are, that will hopefully help to put the relevant content in front of the candidate, and we're looking forward to that going live. And then the second tool I mentioned is Brazen, and it's a virtual career fair, and we've actually combined that in some cases with Text Recruit and a couple of other tools to try and make sure that we can drive some large, high volume hiring for leads that we didn't convert. So meaning they had signed up for some sort of event in our high volume space, but for whatever reason, the day didn't work out for them. They might have moved on to a different job, but it's really trying to continue. We always try and think about simple goals, and the two simple goals I always try to drive towards is improving the candidate experience, and then also converting the number of people that we have already in our purview. And so that one really addresses that aspect of it, and so that's become an interesting way for us to continue our interaction with candidates.
I love that recommendation of Altru. I'm going to check it out for sure, because I think from the employer branding side, it's
Yes.
We're always trying to give voice to your employees, but you end up with a highly filtered top-down approach in terms of who you select for the profiles that you can put on your site. And I've really been rethinking how we do that, because you just get very frustrated with trying to find the perfect person that can represent everything, but then having the right diverse mix and the right geographies and the right business brands. And this should be a bottom-up grassroots approach, and it's more authentic that way as well.
Well, and what's really fascinating about that, and Adam, I'm happy to share the deck with you because it's got a lot of some really great stats, but the thing that I like the most about it is even though we do have this kind of approval process, so we'll look at it from a brand perspective and make sure we're not sharing things that we shouldn't be from a legal perspective, and then the business unit kind of gets the final sign off. We do have this one way to turn on or turn off that video, and if somebody leaves the organization, it's a much easier way to manage the content than versus, oh my gosh, I just spent $30,000 shooting a day in the life video. To your point, it's highly polished, it's really slick, but it's really not true. It's not exactly what that person experiences. You know, some of our field techs are crawling underneath mobile homes. It's not really what we want to put in the day in life, but it's reality. And so how do you convey those in a much more meaningful way is to have your own people tell a story. So we're looking forward to it.
So when we ask this question, our drop-down lists have nothing to do with any of the tools you just mentioned. So we probably need to update this question, but we were focused on like what were the tools they were using to manage that source of hire data. But really great concepts as well. But it was all over the map. We didn't even put a graph to this because the data was all over the map in terms of what people are trying to use to measure, what they're going to use. And so one thing I'd ask, so all true, when that comes into the mix, do you have a strategy for how that data will get measured in terms of performance? What are the thoughts there?
So it's going to be more of an influence, kind of going back to our conversation around that, because it's going to we can see Altru has metrics built into the platform, so we'll be able to see the engagement level in different videos. So will it necessarily go into source of hire? We will be able to also measure that because we will have tags on that because it's part of our career site. We've actually done a lot of work around our pathway to conversion, and so we tend to go back to the digital tracking of that. But where I want to go next is be able to measure out what we also have recorded in Brass Ring, which incorporates that recruiter perspective that we don't have the luxury of having on the digitally tracked version. So I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, I think it's differentiating between what is an influence and what is actually one of the touch points. It's what happens at the touch point that gets measured in terms of whether it moves the needle from a conversion rate from the point of view of their decision to move forward. So I think what we have is we're overwhelmed with a variety of different types of technologies out there. We've got to decide what's in that tech stack, and then what we're doing with it in order to move the conversion or whatever we want to do. And that's why when we look at stuff like ATS and CRM, we're basically tracking the fact that there's a touch point in there, but we may not know how they got there. Or we just know the last place they stopped before they got there. And we start putting new tools on top of all of those things to look deeper at that journey and to understand what happened when they got there. So it's...
Go on. I was going to say a second piece to that, Gerry, kind of riffing off of that for a second. It's not just where they went or how they got there. It was which version of which message resonated with that particular audience. So there's this layered nuance to the data that makes it impactful and useful. Right. Which is really, that's like the Rosetta Stone to get to, right? We haven't, I don't know how we get there, but the ability to not only be able to tell me where did we hit and when and how did they manage that journey, but also which of the elements and the right messaging and the right tone and all those different elements came together to start to move and to resonate and to make people have some sort of emotion which drove them to an action. And until I can see that, I can't really influence the work that my recruitment marketing team is doing, for example.
Cool. All good points.
All right, I'm going to move us on. Next question is, what types of sources are you using to recruit talent, and what are you excited about? And Allyn, I'm going to start with you.
So we're using kind of all the standard sources that are out there, right? So obviously, our we look at our career marketing site as our hub source, right? And then we have a variety of stuff that, from a digital perspective, moves people in and out of that career marketing site. Can be everything from emailing to text to point and click advertising that's existing out there that we use as source. Then we have a lot of live source work that we do, events, campus recruiting, everything from that to handshake cards at conferences that we track at some level to start to give us that information. I think the stuff that we're most excited about are the things that are starting to cross the boundary between what feels like a live or personalized interaction with a candidate, but is actually able to execute at scale. So for example, you talked about Brazen, right, and the ability to do virtual career events, or other technologies and sources that are going to allow us to reach on scale, but in a personalized way to our candidates in order to pull them in and to actually get them a sense of what it's like to work in our environment.
Very cool. So these were just some of the ones, and the data here is all over the place. So Martin, I'm going to ask you if you've got any words of wisdom on this topic from clients you've worked with.
Yeah, sure. So lots actually. Wisdom-wise, that's a shorter list. But I'll focus on something that we measure a lot and pretty obsessively here and for our clients, and it helps our clients too. Is we call it it's an internal term, quality applicants, which means different things externally. So, for lack of a better term, we'll call it silver medalists. And what we like to look at is not just number of applies, number of hires, but there's a third metric in there where we work with our client to work out what in your interview workflow is a quality applicant. If somebody makes it past the second round, is that someone who you think is great, even if they aren't hired? It still means that they're pretty solid quality. Or is your phone screen where in that kind of that workflow in that list is the cutoff where if they made this far, they're pretty darn good. And that can vary by department as well. So your tech team might be like, if they can make it past our virtual whiteboard and make it in here, they're really good. Versus your call center might be like, look, we bring in more bodies. They make the second round, they're good. So you can sort of you can bucket it by role and kind of category. But from there, then you can start measuring your sources and say, well, if we had 100 applicants from source A and one got hired, and we 10 from source B and 9 were silver medalists, the source B is actually pretty good. It's just it's a little more efficient, frankly, versus A, which is flooding our team, and they got lucky with one hire. So that third metric, that source of quality applicant, that silver medalist, whatever you want to call it, helps kind of guide you as far as a control on your experiments. You actually can gauge so the source of hire actually is really good. It's also a source of all of our silver medalists, or they got lucky, but this second source here, don't discount them. Next time around, you might get the hire. So I like looking at that piece too, if that makes sense.
Yep, absolutely. And Allyn, I was reading one of your articles recently about pipelines over recs and and all the work that Intel's been doing around that. And I think the term you guys used was putting people safely back in the pipeline after they've interviewed, so that you can continue that relationship with them. And yeah, I think the tracking behind that's a key thing too. Yeah,
this ties to that for sure. Yeah, when you're talking pipelines earlier, I was like, yes, you get it. You totally get it. So it's that idea.
Right. I mean, this is the challenge, right? If you start thinking about moving from just focus on the transaction of individual hires, but start thinking about how are you managing engagement and the relationship with people over time inside that pipeline. What I need out of source of hire or source of or touch point data becomes very different. And I don't necessarily know if we know what that is yet. Silver medalist stuff, though, excites me. I think that's very close to near and near to where we need to start going and understanding at least where is it starting to influence our ability to understand people who are of value to us. What's quality over volume, right? Which is part of what silver medalist data starts to get to.
And when we're talking about quality, we're often talking about the quality at this moment. some of the folks that 10 to 1 who never get to the point where they become silver medalists may in fact be great quality clients, quality prospects a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now. But we really don't invest much in understanding why those individuals made the effort to apply, then never got any further because they just didn't have what we were looking for at this moment. And we need a deeper understanding of that group as well. And I understand we need to do this pipeline in probably order of priority, but I don't think we should ever forget that there's people who have invested significant time in demonstrating they're interested in us, but never go any further.
Right. And by the way, Gerry, the flip side of that is we invested time, money, and resource to attract them in the first place, right?
Exactly. That's true.
I talk about them as our gold, right? We spent money on them. They're there. We might as well do something with them or learn enough about them to figure out what to do with them later on so I don't have to go re-spend, right?
Yep.
Reduce. The recycling method. Reduce, reuse, recycle.
Yeah. Well, and we've been pretty much talking about touch points, so I went ahead and brought up that next question around, that importance to measure the ability of a touch point, which is what we've been talking about largely. And, a lot of people, considered it a nice to have all the way to a deal breaker. Nobody thought it was optional. Any other commentary from others on the panel as it relates to touch points and tracking?
It just confirms what I think people are realizing, and that is we may not have confidence in the data, but we think it's important.
Yeah, and that delta's kind of scary.
And so we're even going to deal with bad data if we have to, because it's that important to us.
Yeah. This one ties to the first one, which is just the technology itself that you're using to track. And Jen, I'd love to start with you on this one. Is just, how well do you understand the technology that's in place today that you're using to track the data that you do have, that you're leveraging the decisions? Like, how much has it been tested and confirmed on your end versus just we're getting this data and using it? If that makes sense.
I'd say that I would say about 50% of it I feel pretty confident on, because that's what we've been tracking on the two, and that's just all digital tracking tags. I'd say the other 50% is that squishy, weird stuff that is somewhere in the touch points, but isn't digitally tracked. And so it's the rest of it. It's the employer referrals, which we rely sadly on our RFOs to have someone that dictates that person was an employer referral. Right, wrong, or otherwise, that's currently how we do it. And so there's certainly optimization that can still happen. And that's why I say you're never done. Like, there's always going to be some other area where you're going to want to dig into and make it more valid. But the more you can get it validated, obviously, is the goal.
Yeah, and I would say, just in terms of just understanding technology itself, often tricky because technology has gotten more and more complicated. But the couple times that I've really been able to dig in deep when implementing technology, whether it was like a referral system or when I was working with Mary Grace and implementing Smashfly at McGraw-Hill, like, the more I kind of dug into it, of course it brings up more questions about the data and validity of the data, but it also really helped me understand new ways that I could use this technology and then make decisions off of it. When I suddenly realized, we can post the same job, but with 2 different titles, 2 different job descriptions, really do A/B testing and then understand with which sources this is working better and what quality of candidates are coming. That was a bit of a breakthrough moment for me to work on other things, projects that I'd always wanted to do. Like, how do we do better job descriptions? You can use the technology to help you prove some of your pet projects and your theories once you understand how things work better.
And I can tell you, as somebody who was on the builder side of this stuff, there are many layers, and it's vigilance and testing, and then more vigilance and testing to keep it consistent. And there are nuances to it, and it can be straightforward, but it takes being a priority. So.
Yeah.
All right. And this was on the veering on the not well understood. So everything kind of was even except for the veering on the I don't quite understand what's going on under the covers here was what most people have answered on this one. And we've got 10 minutes left, so I want to get us. This is the last kind of question we had, and then we can. I don't know, Gerry, if any questions have come in from the group, but
yeah, we have a couple.
Okay. So last but not least, of the sources influencing a candidate's journey, if you could choose, so let's say that you got to wave your magic wand and choose how technology should work moving forward, you know, which would you think is most important in determining the value of a source today? For example, every source touch point gets equal weight. The first one gets more weight. The candidate gets to choose what gets the most weight. The last one gets the most weight. Like if you got to choose of the candidates, how would you want to choose what's most important? Or do you have thoughts on that? And Allyn, I was going to start off with you on this one. So.
I know, I'm pausing. I'm like, what do I think? So I'm not so sure they all get equal weight, but I would tell you I am much more interested in the touch points and understanding all of the touch points than I am the last touch point to the hire. And maybe that's because we're in at Intel at a large enterprise level, getting people to apply is not my problem. It just isn't. My problem is getting people to engage and getting people to apply to the right thing. So as much as I can use the data around touch points and where candidates are interacting with us to help me understand that and to help influence that and to get the right people to the right opportunities, that's more useful to me than the end state. So the last stop is actually pretty, it's not useful at all for me. It's all the stuff in between.
Yeah, it's about what they do in that last stop potentially that has the most impact, especially when you see such a strong sense of the career site is the largest source of hire. And I'm going, well, right. Okay, that was the last stop they made. We don't know how they got there or why they even bothered to come. We would have loved to have done that because maybe there's some people missing that we would have loved to have come to our website. So they could have been applying. But obviously, if you're concerned about the issues around why they apply or that they're applying to the right thing, then you're looking at what they did when they were at the career site that gave them some sense that they could apply for the wrong thing, if you will. And you didn't help them to direct to the better job.
Yeah, and you nailed it on the head. Right now, if you look at just the last stop, 9 chances out of 10, and we know we see this every day, our biggest source of hire is our career site. Well, of course it is. The digital journey all points to it.
I will tell you, I have a gut sense
right?
that there's been a significant increase in candidate decisions that are based in part on relationships that they have or develop while they're in this journey. And yet we don't measure, we really don't capture that. We have a formal, referral kind of thing. But if you really look at the kind of casual things that never get counted as referrals, they may go to Indeed, they may go to Glassdoor, they may go to your website directly because they've heard about you in the news, whatever it is that caused them to get there. But somewhere in all of that, they go, yeah, this is interesting. I see that they have real jobs. Now I'm going to go call somebody, and they do, and they talk to them and they engage. And now they come back and they make a decision to move forward. And we've not captured the impact of the decision. And that's where I think we should be collecting more data. And that's going to be a key issue, I think, for the future.
Well, Gerry, you are so spot on. My plea out there to all CRMs and recruitment marketing platforms where I am able to go and capture engagement data. They have to give me a way to do exactly what you just said, Gerry, be able to capture the personal engagements that are happening so it can be part of how I track that entire journey. Today, most of them only allow me to track it from the auspices of being able to put it in a note or capture it and say, somebody talk to them. It's actually a source.
Right.
And I need to look at all of it in relationship as a source.
And even if you attempt some form of communication with the candidates themselves to ask them a little bit about their journey,
right?
The tools that we tend to have are still very primitive in terms of how they set it up. So we're going to have a nuanced improvement in some of that hardware and software out there if we're going to be able to dig into this a little bit better.
So one of the things Gerry and I have been talking about, and I forgot there was one last question, which is this concept of, we've all got opinions, experiences, and viewpoints on this. You guys, based on your experiences, are farther along, honestly, than a lot of organizations in your thought model on this. And I've experienced the steps backwards from consulting over the past year with smaller organizations that haven't been working with even some of the basic tracking needs that are needed to support passing source data into the ATS, for example, or having the tracking pixel on the final page, which are just kind of table stakes in my historic viewpoint. And so I come to Gerry with this discussion point of what if there were standards? What if we established so that the talent acquisition industry in general understood this is what we should expect from our providers. This is what a click means. This is what a view means. This is what a conversion means. So, if there was an independent body that got together and established those standards so that practitioners understood this is what the industry is asking us to do, and that they had something concrete to work against. Do you think that would be helpful for talent acquisition providers and or practitioners as yourself? Thoughts on that?
Well, and let me just talk about this from a slightly different piece, because I think the word standards very often raises a whole set of issues as to whether there's you're forced to do things a certain way, as opposed to guidelines, threshold. Agreements around some of the definitions in terms of what they are, so that a vendor or a provider could be able to say, here is what the guidelines call for, and we can comply with them this way, or we've enhanced them or augmented them by adding this feature to it. I think it's going to be important for us to better be able to benchmark amongst ourselves, as well as just have a kind of an agreement that allows for just broader dissemination of what we're doing.
Yes, Gerry, thanks for that additional context. I do think that it's extremely important to set standards. When I think about the fact that I'm fortunate to work for an organization that happens to have part of the organization in advertising sales, so understanding, having standards, but also understanding the value of advertising is kind of helpful in my case personally, internally, to have the function I have. Not a lot of other organizations, smaller businesses, won't have the luxury of having access to such tools. So I think by having those, you're really helping those organizations that may not have like a full-blown recruitment marketing team, for instance. And so I think that's where the value in my mind comes into play.
Yeah, I think it's even more important in those cases. If you're a one-man show or a one-man show with lots of dotted lines, as I am, and I think a lot of people in the marketing space are. Where do you go to define what is it that we are measuring and need to measure? I think it would be very useful.
Cool. How about you, Allyn? How would Intel feel about that?
Yeah, it's critical for us, right? I mean, it is, as I mentioned, if nothing else, to be able to have an outside body say this is what it is, helps me even internally, right? To have that conversation across a variety of different business groups in a global organization to say a click is a click is a click, and this is what it means, and that all of the vendors are aligned to that and executing to that, it changes the game. It takes the time that I have to spend from having that conversation to actually being able to analyze and use the data.
So one of the things that we could do, literally starting next week, is to have a call for providers, consultants, and practitioners to participate in a 90-day, so June 1 to September 1, be able to build a set of guidelines that practitioners that meet those kinds of guidelines, if you will, that we're talking about, at least move towards better defining some of those key issues. And then hopefully it's something that you can use from a practical point of view to have a conversation with whoever is helping you collect and clean and report on some of that data, so that you can get to where you want to go a little bit faster with a little more confidence that what you've got at least is consistent and can reliably be repeated. And that could be a key issue, I think. If we could do that, I think we'd be moving the needle a little bit.
Yeah, I think it'd be a huge thing.
I'm all for it. Yeah.
So to that end, there's a link if you're interested in being involved in helping set the standards or the guidelines or whatever we decide to call it. If you're interested in getting involved, there is a link on GraceRock.com/source of hire to share your information and how you'd like to participate. And we'll be able to garner level of interest and work to move things forward from there.
Some good, I think that's a great way to end, but we do have a couple questions that have been cropping up. I know that Glenn most recently just said, why hasn't anyone in this webinar mentioned chatbots yet? Only because that's another hour's worth of conversation, Glenn. And everybody is seriously considering them, though. I will tell you, at least 25% of my members have some kind of ongoing effort to begin playing with chatbots in some way, shape, or form. I will tell you that off to the side, that probably within 2 months, a major retailer that hires hundreds of thousands of store workers will in fact white label their own chatbot that will take care of most of the recruiting process. And when that announcement comes out, I suspect you'll see it in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal almost immediately. And someone then commented that maybe chatbots haven't been getting all of the value, but you know, it is what it is. Tomorrow there'll be something else that we've never even heard of before that people will look at as the final source that will handle it all. I think
blockchain's back.
Yeah. There's a lot of questions in here. I think that those of you who raised some of those questions, love to see you on the committee, because I think we're going to have some conversation about how we should be looking at sources and providing some guidelines around how to do this in a way that's consistent in a variety of different ways. I do think this has been a great conversation.
Gerry, thanks so much for teeing us up and helping get this going. So it's been fun.
This recording will end about now.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Career Crossroads. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave a review and subscribe. And for more great content and to stay up to date, visit www.cxr.works, facebook.com and twitter.com/careerxroads. We'll catch you next time.